there's some stuff certainly to talk about. I think a good follow-up to last week and our great conversation with Jamie Mandola and talking about the New Jersey regulations that had just dropped, I think, right as we were going to record last week. Well, since then, for those that tuned in last week, we did talk about one of the provisions was that municipalities had to opt in or out of cannabis, and the numbers are in. And I think it's a little worse than I had thought as far as opt-in. Looks like 70% of municipalities, so towns, cities in New Jersey, have actively banned cannabis. Roughly 400 municipalities there, and the ones that have approved it, there's a large number that kind of approve it with caveats. I think 98 municipalities place strict zoning regulations on where these retailers or other operators could exist, and then another 41 towns basically said, yeah, you can cultivate it here or you can run a company from here, but you can't retail it here. You can't actually sell it here. So this was frustrating, of course, being in the industry, right? Certainly frustrating to see this kind of thing, especially frustrating given how long I feel like New Jersey's talked about legalization and how long they've had to kind of get their heads wrapped around it. And then you combine that with how many other states have legalized, and just to kind of land like this. Like, I don't know the numbers, like maybe they're like the smallest towns and maybe the 30% that have it are the biggest municipalities. So I don't know from like a population perspective and an access perspective, but it, often is access. And something that we've talked about in the past is California and just the recent changes that are happening in California. And that went to the ballot, and the voters changed a lot of the rules and the outright bans that were happening in California. And then to see this kind of come out of New Jersey, not the best. How do you feel about that headline?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of knew it would be a little gnarly because, as we talked about, if you opt in, you can't opt out afterwards. But if you opt out, you leave yourself the option to take more time and to decide to opt in. That being said, to your exact point, Sai, I mean, they've had a lot of time where they've been talking about this. They've also had the opportunity of watching these other markets turn on and the benefits of having a legal program within your jurisdictions. So I think it is disappointing nonetheless, but I think this is just another example. And this has been a theme, I feel like, for this year of private industry trying to move this whole thing forward, government slowing it down. And I feel like it's just because they haven't taken the time to really understand it, to understand the constituents' point of view, and to really see the benefits of it, and that it's a net positive thing when you legalize and regulate these types of businesses within your jurisdictions. As you were talking, I was just thinking maybe we could do a psychographic kind of overlay of the map to try to understand and look and see if we can extrapolate. And maybe we could even look. I know one of the things we were talking about pre-show was like, we saw this in California, and we're still seeing jurisdictions that are not allowing for legal adult use cannabis within their, the four walls of their cities. And so I think it would be really interesting to try to understand, is it politics? Is it general age of that population? Is it any religious affiliations? It would just be really curious to kind of see if there are factors that repeat throughout these different markets where this happens, because I was listening this morning. It's starting to happen in New York State. I guess they have until December 31st to decide whether or not they would like to opt in. And it's the same thing. If you opt in, you're in. If you opt out, you still can opt in down the line. And I was listening to these two mayors from the southern tier, so Western New York, south of Buffalo. One of the mayors was from a town that has struggled. Their industry has pulled out. They are seeking tax revenue, and he's very pro the industry because and it was interesting. You could hear him talking about the numbers he's researched to see what it could translate to in a town of his size. Whereas this other mayor, and because I'm from Buffalo, I know these towns, he was from another town, and it's a little bit more affluent. They haven't had the same struggles as this town. I believe they still have a pretty robust business and commerce center. And so he's very hard on, and he was like, this is what frustrated me actually more than the fact that he wanted to ban it, was that I just felt like he was perpetuating the stigma and old myth around cannabis. Like, oh, the state just pushed this through so quickly. I'm like, so quickly? It's taken years. And that they've tried to tell us it was going to be easy, but we don't really know. And then throwing around the terms of recreational and all this, and the way that they talk about it, it feels very Nancy Reagan war on drugs, cracking an egg in a frying pan. And so that is like the most disappointing part about it. But it would be really interesting to see if we could understand the trends, because it could really help us. And from an investment standpoint, it would help me to think about it, going forward. When you look at the map of New York, what's going to happen? When you look at Connecticut, what's going to happen? Rhode Island, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think you and I have a low tolerance for for these things because we've been at it for a while. But I was pretty staggered by that 70%. That was higher than I thought. I thought we'd net in around 50 to 60.
Yeah, that's a really good point about kind of an overlay, like a socioeconomic overlay, to see kind of how this plays out. And I'd have to guess it's what we would assume. And those same kind of conversations that are happening in those towns in New York probably were happening in New Jersey. Yeah, you're right that the tolerance is low. I think, after being in the industry for a decade, we're just so close to it, but maybe it's new. And the fact that individual said it's happened so fast, and we've known how long New York has taken, and is still taking. It's it's funny, I guess, when you're just not that close to it every day like we are. I think it's good news for delivery. Like, just looking at in the provisions, they cannot ban delivery, and so I know that was another point of discussion last week. We kind of talked about the space for delivery, and delivery in cannabis is a tricky thing. It's not Amazon products leave at your door, right? It's 21 plus. You got to be there to take a delivery. But from an access perspective, I think that maybe that's a silver lining to this whole thing, that they can't prohibit delivery in these areas. So maybe there will be that access that might otherwise be lacking. But the other disappointing thing is just like the zoning stuff, and just hearing about these. We were talking weeks ago about this California change where you're starting to see it on Main Street. And like this is what's going to change a lot of the perceptions, is when you just see it next to a regular old store. You don't have to go to some industrial park that's, abandoned because it's Saturday and, no one's there because all the other businesses are closed, and you got to find this one store. That's not a good experience. You really have to go out of your way. You're not just going to walk in and take a look, and so hearing that was a little disappointing too.
I mean, okay, again, I'm from Buffalo, New York. I am not casting stones here, but like, all you have to do is watch the intro segment to the credits to The Sopranos to see that the zoning in New Jersey is not precious. I mean, you can have a strip club next to a car wash, next to a Target, and it's like there are children going up and down Route 22 seeing all of that. This is not something like, and so seeing something for a strip club is far more impressionable than a good-looking apothecarium store that you can't even see the product. Yeah. So, I mean, let's not be too precious here about the zoning. It's not logical. And I think that's what really bothers me. And I'm sure you share that same feeling.
Yeah, certainly do. And I'm certain many of the listeners probably feel the same way. It's just getting everyone else to listen is kind of the tricky part. But yeah, we'll follow this. I think will be interesting to see how it shakes out. Maybe it's just a couple years behind where a market like California is, and we'll see on a ballot in the future municipalities, taking it to the voters to get the laws changed, to get the zoning changed, to create more access. Because as we've seen in other markets, it's always a net positive ultimately, right? By having legal cannabis, and you have legal cannabis, and you ban it in your cities. People are going to still find it. People are still going to buy it. It just drives black market, and that's worse for them than a store on Main Street.
Yeah, and the operators who are, I'm sure they're looking right now, like what jurisdictions am I next to that just banned it, and thinking about delivery into those places, because it's absolutely a strategy. So I mean, we've seen it here in California, for example, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And, Sausalito and Tiburon, very affluent areas where people are absolutely consumers of cannabis. And so operators in Sonoma deliver down into those areas, or operators in San Francisco proper are going right over the bridge. So it's not like you're not going to get it. You're just not going to benefit from the tax revenue.
Listen to High Rise on all major streaming platforms and watch the visual on YouTube.